Dawn breaks slowly over Point Cruz, Guadalcanal, January 1943. The jungle does not wake all at once. First comes the damp heat, rising from the earth like breath. Then the insects. Then the distant thunder of artillery rolling far inland. American. Marines crouch low behind sandbags and rotting logs, their uniforms dark with sweat and red mud. Every man knows the rule here. If you stand still too long, someone is already watching you. Somewhere ahead, hidden deep in the tangled green, Japanese snipers wait. They are patient. They have been here for weeks. They fire once, then disappear. A helmet lifts, someone dies. A head turns, someone bleeds out in the mud. Fear has learned this terrain faster than the men have. Behind the line, an American corporal checks his rifle dot. It is not standard issue, that it is not even military issued. At all dot, the weapon resting in his hands was ordered from a catalog before the war. A civilian bolt-action hunting rifle. Officers had laughed when they saw it. Others shook their heads. In a war defined by machine guns, mortar, and semi-automatic firepower, this rifle looked outdated, slow, and pointless. Someone had joked. It belonged in the mountains, not the jungle. Another said it would get him killed. The corporal says nothing. He adjusts his position, studies the leaves, the shadows, the unnatural stillness where nature should be moving. He is not thinking about doctrine. He is not thinking about reputation. He is thinking about angles, distance, breath. 4 days from now, 11 Japanese snipers will be dead, and the officers, who mocked his mail-order rifle, will never laugh again. By the time American forces landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942, the war in the Pacific had already shattered pre-war assumptions on both sides. Japan had spent years preparing for a fast, decisive conflict. Its planners believed that if the United States could be bloodied early at Pearl Harbor in the Philippines, across Southeast Asia American political will would fracture. What followed was a stunning advance. Hong Kong fell. Singapore collapsed. The Philippines were overrun. By mid-1942, Japanese forces stood astride an empire stretching from Burma to the Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal was supposed to be another quiet outpost. Instead, it became the first place where that expansion was forcibly stopped. The island itself was unimpressive on maps. Dense jungle, swamps, razor-backed ridgelines, torrential rain. But its airfield, later named Henderson Field, commanded the sea lanes between the United States and Australia. Whoever controlled it could project air power across the Central Pacific. For Japan, losing Guadalcanal meant losing strategic momentum. For the Americans, holding it became non-negotiable. By late 1942 and early 1943, the campaign had devolved into a grinding, intimate fight. Naval battles raged offshore at night. Air raids hammered supply lines by day. On land, neither side could establish clean fronts. The jungle erased lines and replaced them with proximity. This environment favored a particular kind of warfare. The Imperial Japanese Army had long emphasized marksmanship, concealment, and individual initiative. Japanese infantry training placed enormous value on patience and fieldcraft. Soldiers learned to move silently through vegetation, to observe without being seen, and to fire only when a kill was nearly certain. On Guadalcanal, this doctrine found perfect ground. Japanese snipers did not operate as isolated specialists in the Western sense. Many were simply well-trained infantrymen assigned to sniper roles as needed. They used captured terrain, treetops, and cleverly disguised positions. They studied American habits. They waited. The psychological impact was immediate. U.S. Marines and Army units had trained for maneuver warfare and massed firepower. They expected contact at ranges where squad tactics and automatic weapons dominated. What they encountered instead was an enemy who fired rarely but with devastating effect. A single shot could halt an advance. Single unseen rifle could pin an entire platoon. Casualties came without warning and without visible attackers. Reports from Guadalcanal repeatedly described the same problem. Men were being picked off during routine movements while fetching water, adjusting positions, or relieving sentries. Helmets became liabilities. Silence itself felt dangerous. American doctrine had not prioritized counter-sniper warfare. Standard infantry rifles, the M1 Garand especially, were excellent weapons for advancing fire and close combat. But they were loud. Their rate of fire encouraged volume over precision. In the jungle, that noise revealed positions faster than it suppressed threats. Meanwhile, Japanese snipers often used bolt-action rifles with low profiles and carefully selected firing points. They were not interested in suppressing fire. They were interested in certainty. As casualties mounted, frustration spread up the chain of command. Patrol reports grew vague. Morale suffered. Officers demanded solutions, but doctrine offered few. Artillery could not reliably reach individual snipers hidden beneath foliage. Automatic fire wasted ammunition without effect. Charging blindly into the jungle only produced more losses. It was within this tactical gap that improvisation began to appear. Some Marines modified their gear. Others abandoned regulation in small ways, changing movement patterns, altering sentry routines, learning to read the jungle instead of fighting it. A few soldiers went further, quietly bringing weapons that did not fit official tables of organization. Hunting rifles, scoped bolt actions, civilian firearms chosen not for rate of fire, but for clarity, range, and control. These choices were unofficial, sometimes discouraged, often mocked. Yet as Guadalcanal dragged on, the battlefield itself began to cast judgment, not through doctrine or reports, but through survival. And in the silent spaces between shots, a new understanding started to form. This war would not always be won by firing faster. Sometimes it would be won by seeing first. By early 1943, Guadalcanal had become a proving ground not for grand strategy, but for survival under pressure. The U.S. military entered the Pacific War with confidence in its industrial power and fire superiority. Its infantry doctrine emphasized aggression, momentum, and coordinated fire. In Europe, these principles would later prove decisive. On Guadalcanal, however, they collided with an enemy that refused to fight on predictable terms. Japanese snipers exploited routine. They observed patrol times, noted which trails were used repeatedly, learned how American units rotated sentries, and distributed rations. They did not hunt randomly. They hunted patterns. U.S. after-action reports from the period revealed growing concern over invisible fire. Officers described an enemy that seemed omnipresent yet rarely visible. Snipers were blamed for casualties that disrupted entire operations, even when actual numbers were relatively small. Fear amplified their effect. What troubled commanders most was not just the losses, but the loss of control. When soldiers believe they are being watched, movement slows, communication tightens, initiative collapses. Units begin reacting rather than acting. On Guadalcanal, Japanese snipers achieved this psychological leverage with remarkable efficiency. Formal countermeasures lagged behind the reality on the ground. There were no standardized American sniper schools at this stage of the war. Optical sights were scarce. Most infantrymen had little training in long-range precision fire or camouflage techniques beyond the basics. Leadership understood the problem, but lacked a ready solution. So the solution emerged from below. Small unit. Leaders began authorizing quiet deviations from regulation. Patrols paired experienced marksmen with observers. Soldiers scavenged scopes from damaged equipment. Some men arrived in theater, already carrying personal rifles, purchased before the war, hunting weapons with accurate barrels and reliable optics. Among these was a Marine corporal from the Pacific Northwest, whose civilian background included years of hunting in dense forest terrain. He understood stillness, understood patience, understood how to distinguish living silence from dead foliage. To officers trained on European battlefields, his rifle looked obsolete. A bolt-action civilian. Weapon had no place, they argued, in modern warfare. It lacked the volume of fire. It lacked intimidation. It lacked standardization. But it had something else. Could place one round exactly where it needed to go without revealing its shooter. As Japanese sniper activity intensified near Henderson Field and along key approach routes, the corporal was quietly assigned tasks others avoided. He did not advance with the main line. He did not fire rapidly. He watched. He waited. He learned the enemy's habits as carefully as they had learned his. Within days, Japanese sniper positions began falling silent. Not all at once. Not dramatically. One by one, bodies were found after patrols advanced positions carefully chosen, fields of fire, overlapping trails and clearings. Each discovery confirmed a pattern. Someone had been watching the watchers. Word spread quickly. Through the ranks, men who had feared lifting their heads now pointed out likely firing points. Officers who had dismissed the civilian rifle began requesting its presence on patrols. The laughter stopped, not because doctrine had changed, but because results had. In formal terms, nothing was official yet. No manuals were rewritten. No. Doctrine immediately revised. But on Guadalcanal, reality moved faster than regulation. The American military was learning a hard lesson, one it would carry forward into later campaigns. Technology mattered. Numbers mattered. But adaptation mattered more. The jungle did not reward speed alone. It rewarded understanding. And this realization would echo far beyond Guadalcanal, shaping how American forces approached not just snipers, but the nature of modern infantry combat itself. The shift was subtle, quiet, almost invisible. Much like the men who forced it to happen. Angle. 1. The human element. Skill before system. World War II is often remembered as a contest of machines, tanks, aircraft, factories, assembly lines. Yet in places like Guadalcanal, war collapsed back into something far older and more intimate. One man, one rifle, one decision at a time. John George was not extraordinary because he owned a special weapon. He was extraordinary because he understood how to use it under pressure. Long before the war, competitive shooting had trained him to control breathing, manage recoil, and read distance instinctively. Those skills were invisible on a parade ground, but decisive in the jungle. Japanese snipers were disciplined and patient, but they operated within assumptions. They believed American infantry relied on volume of fire rather than precision. They believed U.S. soldiers would expose themselves during movement. They believed bolt-action rifles were slow, outdated, and tactically inferior. George exploited those beliefs. He did not rush shots. He did not fire unless a hit was likely. Each engagement was deliberate. Each round was a decision. In an environment where every sound carried consequences, restraint became a weapon. What separated him from the average rifleman was not courage, but control. Control of nerves. Control of timing. Control of impulse. In the jungle, this mattered more than rate of fire. Angle 2. Tactical reality. Why firepower failed in the trees on paper? The U.S. infantryman was superior. The M1 Garand offered semi-automatic fire. 8 rounds, faster reloads, greater suppression. Against massed enemy formations, it was devastating. But Guadalcanal was not a battlefield of formations. It was a battlefield of shadows. Visibility rarely exceeded 100 yards. Engagements unfolded. In seconds, targets appeared briefly, then vanished. Firing rapidly only revealed positions. Each shot invited return fire. Japanese snipers understood this terrain intimately. They positioned themselves high in banyan and palm trees, using elevation to observe trails and supply routes. From above, they could fire downward into gaps in cover. After shooting, they remained motionless for hours, allowing fear to do the work for them. American doctrine emphasized movement and aggression, but movement in the jungle meant noise. Aggression meant exposure. George reversed the equation. He allowed the jungle to dictate tempo. He let hours pass without firing. He waited for confirmation movement that broke natural patterns. A shadow where none should be. A branch bending without wind dot when he fired. It was not to suppress, but to remove. This precision disrupted Japanese sniper teams, which often operated in pairs. Once one man fell, the second was forced to move or be discovered. That movement, in turn, created another opportunity. The jungle punished haste. It rewarded patience. Angle 3. Technology, the misunderstood value of optics. The Lyman, Alaskan scope mounted on George's Winchester Model 70, was modest by modern standards. 2.5 power magnification. No range-finding reticle. No adjustments for elevation beyond basic clicks, but it offered something critical. Clarity. In the jungle, the naked eye struggled to separate depth from foliage. Branches layered upon branches, light filtered unevenly. Movement blurred into shadow. The scope did not provide dominance. It provided discrimination. George did not look for targets. He looked for disturbances. A scope allowed him to study a tree slowly, systematically, to observe how leaves settled, how vines hung, how branches moved when touched by a living body rather than wind. Japanese snipers relied on concealment through stillness. The scope turned stillness into a liability. What looked natural at a glance became suspicious under magnification. This was not technological superiority. It was technological alignment, the right tool for the right environment, wielded by someone trained to understand its limits. Angle 4. Psychological pressure. When hunters become hunted by the second day, Japanese sniper behavior changed. They fired less. They repositioned more often. Some abandoned elevated positions entirely. Others attempted decoys. Mortar fire began targeting suspected firing points. This shift revealed something important. Fear works both ways. Snipers are accustomed to control. They choose when to act. They decide when risk is acceptable. When that control is stripped away. When someone else is watching them, the psychological advantage collapses. George did not just kill snipers. He disrupted confidence. Every unexplained death forced the survivors to question their assumptions. Was the tree safe? Was the shot heard? Had they been seen already? That hesitation reduced effectiveness as surely as casualties. By the end of the 4th day, Japanese sniper operations near Point Cruz had effectively ceased, not because the jungle had changed, but because the balance of fear had. Angle 5. Leadership. When results force belief, military institutions change slowly. Commanders rely on doctrine because doctrine reduces uncertainty. It creates predictability. It allows units to function at scale. But doctrine also resists exceptions, especially those that challenge standardization. John George's rifle challenged everything the U.S. Army believed it needed in 1943. It was privately purchased, non-standard, bolt action, fitted with a civilian optic. By regulation, it had no place on the battlefield. Yet results arrived faster than paperwork. After the first confirmed sniper kills near Point Cruz, George's commanding officers did not issue new orders. They issued quiet permissions. He was allowed to operate independently, allowed to choose positions, allowed to fire when he judged necessary. This was not formal endorsement. It was pragmatic tolerance. Leadership understood something important. Outcomes mattered more than conformity. As reports accumulated, snipers neutralized. Patrols moving freely, again the skepticism faded. Officers who had mocked the rifle stopped, commenting on it altogether. Requests replaced jokes. Could he cover this trail? Could he observe that grove? Could he advise on concealment? George became a resource, not because he asked to be one, but because necessity demanded it. Angle 6. Institutional learning. The birth of an American sniper reality. What occurred on Guadalcanal did not immediately produce a sniper doctrine. That would come later. But it produced awareness. American command recognized that certain battlefield problems could not be solved by volume alone. Suppression did not work against invisible threats. Fire superiority meant little when targets did not present themselves. Precision mattered. In the months that followed, the U.S. Army began quietly identifying soldiers with pre-war shooting experience. Competitive marksmen, hunters, men comfortable with patience. Training remained informal, but intent was clear. Sniper rifles were no longer seen as curiosities. They became tools, rare, specialized, but valuable. This learning process was uneven. It was improvised. It depended on individuals like George to teach others through example rather than instruction manuals. But it worked. By the time American forces moved deeper into the Pacific New Guinea, the Philippines, Okinawa, the idea of counter-sniper operations was no longer foreign. It had been earned. Angle 7. Cost. Why success did not mean safety. Effectiveness carried risk. George's success made him visible, not just to his own command, but to the enemy. Mortar fire targeting his positions demonstrated that Japanese units were actively attempting to neutralize him. Each shot narrowed his margin for error. Each engagement increased the chance of detection. In jungle warfare, survival depended on movement and unpredictability as much as accuracy. This was not heroism in the cinematic sense. It was calculation. George knew that a bolt action rifle offered no second chances. He could not outshoot multiple opponents. He could not afford mistakes. His advantage existed only as long as he remained unseen. The margin was thin, and it would not remain static forever. Angle 8. Legacy. Why this moment mattered beyond Guadalcanal. The clearing of Japanese snipers near Point Cruz was a small event in a massive war. It did not alter grand strategy. It did not appear in headlines, but it changed something subtle. It reminded the American military that individual skill still mattered, even in an industrial war. That technology was only as effective as the understanding behind it. That adaptation, at the lowest level, could ripple upward. The jungle forced the U.S. Army to relearn an old truth. War is not fought by systems alone. It is fought by people who know when to wait and when to act. The jungle around Point Cruz no longer felt neutral. By late September 1942, the silence had changed character. It was no longer empty. It was watchful. Leaves hung motionless. Insects still buzzed, but human movement carried weight now. Every snapped twig meant intention. John George sensed it before anyone told him. Japanese fire had stopped being random. Mortar rounds no longer fell broadly along the perimeter. They arrived closer to his known firing lanes. Machine gun bursts probed tree lines he had used days earlier. The enemy had begun to learn back. This was the turning point. Until now, George had hunted with relative freedom. Japanese snipers revealed themselves through impatience. One shot too many, one position held too long. But now the jungle pushed back. The enemy adjusted firing intervals. They displaced. Faster. They began using decoys, helmets placed on sticks, cloth fluttering to draw fire. This was no longer eradication. It was duel. On the morning, it shifted decisively. Rain fell lightly, turning the forest floor slick and dark. George moved. Before first light, choosing a position he had never used. He crawled, inch by inch, avoiding broken foliage. His rifle stayed wrapped until the last moment. He waited. Hours passed. Then a single, flash barely perceptible, reflected off metal far deeper in the trees than expected. George did not fire immediately. He watched, counted breaths, noted distance. The second flash confirmed it. One shot. The jungle answered with return fire, wild, angry, unfocused. Bullets shredded bark where George had been minutes earlier. Mortar rounds followed, close enough to shake leaves loose from the canopy. He had already moved. This pattern repeated over days. Each engagement grew more dangerous. Each success brought heavier retaliation. But something fundamental had changed. Japanese sniper dominance had broken. Their positions were no longer permanent. Their movement was reactive. Their fire hesitant. The invisible threat that had pinned American units in place for weeks was finally retreating, not in bodies alone, but in confidence. And with that shift came the most dangerous phase of all, because an enemy who realizes he is losing does not withdraw quietly. He adapts desperately. The next encounter would push the limits of patience, concealment, and survival testing whether precision alone could withstand mounting pressure. The Japanese response hardened. By early October 1942, the jungle around Point Cruz felt smaller. Paths once used by patrols were abandoned. Supply runners moved only at night. American Marines no longer crossed open ground without glancing toward the trees first. But now, the fear had shifted direction. Japanese snipers were no longer confident. Hunters. They were being hunted. John George noticed the change in rhythm. Enemy shots came later in the day. Firing positions were abandoned after a single round. Some snipers refused to fire at all unless targets were dangerously close. The psychological balance, the invisible advantage that snipers relied upon, was eroding. That was when the Japanese command attempted to reverse it. They concentrated force. One afternoon, as humidity pressed down like a weight, George detected movement far beyond normal engagement range. Not one figure, several. Two deliberate. 4 patrols. 2 still for assault troops. This was an organized counter-sniper effort. They were looking for him. The first shot came from the flank, not the front. It missed, but close enough to tear bark inches from his cheek. George did not return fire. He froze. He waited. He let the jungle speak. Minutes passed. A second shot closer. Coordinated. Someone was directing fire. George crawled backward, inch by inch, dragging no branches, breaking nothing. When he reached a slight depression in the ground, he stopped. He shifted angles, adjusted breathing, watched the canopy. Then he saw it. A helmet rim, just visible through leaves. A man too tense to remain still. George fired once. The reaction was immediate. Automatic fire erupted from multiple positions. Bullets cut through foliage, branches shattered. Dirt leapt into the air. Grenades followed, thrown blindly, desperately. But the fire came too late. The formation broke. Men withdrew. Unevenly, someone shouted orders. Others ignored them. What had been a coordinated hunt dissolved into confusion. By nightfall, Japanese sniper activity near Point Cruz had collapsed. Reports from Marine units confirmed it. Casualties from unseen rifle fire dropped sharply. Patrols moved more freely. Supply routes reopened. The jungle no longer dictated every step. The turning point was complete. Not because every enemy sniper had been eliminated, but because the remaining ones no longer believed they could dominate the terrain. The psychological edge had shifted. Irrevocably for the Marines on Guadalcanal. That shift mattered as much as any captured hill or destroyed bunker. Because war is not only won by territory, that is won by confidence. And with the jungle finally quieting. The consequences of this change would ripple far beyond point crews' reshaping tactics, morale, and the understanding of precision warfare in the Pacific. What changed? After the jungle fell silent, the difference was felt before it was measured. In the days following the collapse of Japanese sniper pressure near Point Cruz, Marine units noticed it in small, unmistakable ways. Patrols paused less often. Men stood upright longer. Conversations resumed along trails that had once been crossed in silence. The jungle had not become safe, but it had become predictable. Reports filtered upward through command channels. Sniper related. Casualties declined sharply in the sector. Platoon leaders noted fewer unexplained losses during daylight movement. Supply details, once delayed or rerouted due to fear of unseen fire, began moving on schedule again. This was not accidental. Japanese sniper doctrine on Guadalcanal had relied on permanence. Positions were carefully selected, often reused, and psychologically reinforced. Once that permanence was broken, once snipers learned that staying still meant death, the entire system unraveled. Captured documents later confirmed it. Japanese units recorded growing difficulty maintaining effective sniper coverage. Ammunition expenditure increased, while confirmed hits declined. Morale among sniper elements suffered disproportionately compared to line infantry. Men assigned to these roles became hesitant, reluctant to fire unless escape routes were assured. For the Americans, the lesson was equally clear. Precision mattered, but adaptability mattered more. John George's methods were studied quietly, without ceremony. His emphasis on relocation after each shot, extreme patience, and reading terrain rather than forcing engagement began appearing in informal training notes. Other marksmen adopted similar habits. The jungle, once an advantage only for the defender, became a contested space. Higher command took notice as well. By October 1942, Marine doctrine began shifting. Counter-sniper efforts were no longer reactive. They became deliberate. Riflemen were paired with observers. Movement discipline improved. Engagements prioritized suppression of enemy eyes rather than enemy bodies. The psychological effect on Japanese forces extended beyond Point Cruz. As American positions grew more secure. Offensive operations accelerated. Patrols pushed deeper. Artillery observation improved. Night raids became bolder. The erosion of sniper dominance had unlocked momentum, but the cost of this shift was not abstract. It had been earned one position at a time, under constant risk, by men operating alone in hostile terrain, where survival depended on judgment more than firepower. And the full consequences of this change, both tactical and human, would only become clear as the campaign continued into its bloodiest phase. How one sector changed an entire campaign. By late October 1942, the effects of reduced Japanese sniper activity extended far beyond the jungle near Point Cruz. Marine units across Guadalcanal reported similar patterns. Enemy rifle fire became less accurate, less frequent, and more hurried. Where Japanese snipers once controlled daylight movement, they now relied increasingly on nighttime harassment, less precise, more exhausting than lethal. A psychological initiative had changed hands. This shift altered operational tempo. American commanders began planning movements that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Daytime reconnaissance increased. Artillery observers operated with greater freedom. Patrols pushed deeper into contested ground, mapping terrain that had previously been denied. The jungle, while still dangerous, no longer dictated total paralysis. Japanese command struggled to adapt. Their sniper doctrine had been built around static concealment and individual endurance. But American counter-sniper methods emphasized disruption-forcing movement, denying rest, and exploiting impatience. The result was cumulative fatigue. Snipers who survived multiple engagements were physically exhausted and mentally strained. Their effectiveness declined even when they remained alive. For U.S. forces, these lessons did not fade after Guadalcanal. Reports from the campaign circulated through training commands. Field manuals began to reflect new realities of jungle warfare. Emphasis was placed on concealment discipline, patience, and the psychological dimension of marksmanship. The role of the sniper evolved from lone hunter to integrated battlefield tool. John George's actions were never framed as legend during the war itself. They were treated as evidence, proof that careful observation, mobility, and restraint could dismantle an enemy advantage without overwhelming force. By February 1943, when Japanese forces evacuated Guadalcanal, the island told a different story than it had months earlier. American units moved with confidence. The jungle no longer whispered warnings at every step, yet the aftermath carried a quieter truth. The reduction of sniper threat did not end danger. It redistributed it. Close combat increased. Artillery and air power filled gaps left by unseen. Rifles. Warfare shifted rather than softened. And still, the legacy endured, because Guadalcanal marked the moment. American forces learned how to fight an enemy who thrived on invisibility, and how to take that advantage away. That understanding would follow them across the Pacific, from New Guinea to Palaliu, from Leyte to Okinawa. And in the final reflection, the true meaning of that shift becomes clear not in numbers, but in what it revealed about modern warfare itself. What this moment revealed about modern warfare. The jungle of Guadalcanal never became quiet, even after the fighting moved on. It remained dense, humid, and indifferent, unchanged by the men who had struggled within it. But the way it was understood had changed permanently. What unfolded near Point Cruz was not a dramatic breakthrough marked by flags or formal surrender. It was a quieter transformation, an invisible contest where patience overcame aggression and adaptability dismantled certainty. The Japanese sniper advantage did not collapse because of superior numbers or heavier weapons, but because its assumptions were challenged. For American forces, the lesson was enduring. Technology mattered. Weapons mattered. But neither replaced judgment. The effectiveness of the rifle depended on the discipline of the man carrying it. Precision was not speed. Survival was not luck. Victory was not noise. Guadalcanal exposed the psychological layer of warfare. As clearly as any battlefield of the Second World War, fear could shape terrain. Confidence could reclaim it. When the balance shifted, it did so without announcement felt. First in posture, movement, and silence. The campaign would grind on. Lives would still be lost. But something essential had been learned in those hedgerows of jungle and shadow. That modern war was no longer defined solely by mass and momentum. It was defined by awareness. And in that realization born far from headlines, in unseen clearings and patient hours, the future of infantry combat quietly took shape.